So I was supposed to speak after the Prime Minister, and I'll try to do my best to speak before the Prime Minister, and I'll try to finish before he comes. So I don't think that'll be a fair fight if he comes in the middle of my presentation. Anyways, I want to start by a short film.
Again, this is the USS Montana requesting that you immediately divert your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. Over.
Please divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid collision.
This is Captain Hancock. You will divert your course. Over.
Negative, Captain. I'm not moving anything. Change your course. Over.
Sir, this is the USS Montana, the second largest vessel in the North Atlantic Fleet. You will change course 15 degrees north, or I will be forced to take measures to ensure the safety of this ship. Over.
This is a lighthouse, mate. It's your call. Hello, Captain? I think he's gone. Fair enough.
So I want to start by giving my apologies to Silva, but this was just too good of an example of how important human perspectives are. And I think human perspectives, and it was also pretty funny, and I was supposed to be after the Prime Minister, so I wanted something to get you into the groove of my presentation. I want to talk to you about perspectives, motivations, and the people behind cybersecurity. And I want to do it by starting to talk about three things. The first thing that I want to talk about are the people who are the attackers and how attackers have transformed in today's world. The second thing I want to talk to you about are the leaders or the leadership of today's organizations and how the leadership must evolve. And the third thing that I want to talk to you about is probably the most important thing, and that's the talents, the people who actually do the work, the people behind cybersecurity. I want to start by drawing your attention to this slide and try to imagine what you see. And if what goes through your mind is that these are executives strategizing about next year's work plan and think that this is probably a typical boardroom, well, you're probably right. But if you take a closer look, there's a parallel boardroom that's sitting somewhere else, somewhere around the world. And in this boardroom, there are executives, business people, who are doing exactly the same thing. They're strategizing. Because if you looked at today's advanced attacker, they've changed tremendously. If they used to be opportunistic, they're now proactive. And if they used to be tactical, they're now quite strategic. And if the center of what they did was technology, what they do now is more business-oriented. In fact, this might take a look at the attacker ROI, and this might look at the sort of things that they might think about before they choose their next attack vector. They'll think about reward. What is the potential reward? They'll think about the likelihood of success of their operations. They'll think about the anticipated necessary effort and what they're going to be doing. And then they'll choose their next attack vector. Admittedly, this is probably an oversimplified way of looking at things, but at the end of the day, it goes back to ROI. Now, I want to talk to you about one of the most aggressive cyber breaches or business disruptions, and of course I want to talk to you about Sony. How many people have seen the movie? Raise your hand. How many people would have seen the movie if there wouldn't be a breach? Probably less. Now let's try to think about the attacker ROI for Sony. What are they after? Well, if they were after trying to see that nobody sees the movie, well then probably the attacker ROI in this case is not so good, right? Because in fact, we just had a show of hands, more people saw the movie than would have if there wouldn't be a breach. But what if what they were going for was something more subtle? What if they were warning the Sonys of the world that they must think twice before they do something that reflects negatively on the attacker's government? And if there was a chilling effect of the Sonys of the world to do something that looks like this movie in the future, well, perhaps from the attacker's perspective, the return on investment or the ROI here is not so bad. And the question that I want to ask you is, if Sony executives prior to this attack might have been aware of the attacker's perspective and would think about his ROI, could they get a different defense strategy before, during, and after the attack? And I want to go beyond Sony, because Sony is not the story that I want to talk to you about. Let's go to other industries, because in every industry, you must think of the attacker's ROI and your reverse ROI in order to understand how to protect yourself. Because let's go to financial services. What if the Sony-like attack would hit a financial service, a big bank? What's its main business? Trust? Well, would a bank that's been hit by a Sony-like attack would have its trust brought down? Could they rise from the ashes like, admittedly, Sony did? And what if the attack was on the transportation vector or vertical? What if it was an airline? There it has to do with passenger safety. Could they rise from the ashes? And the story that I want to talk to you about, or the message that I want to bring through, is that the cybersecurity experts in organizations, or the CISOs, as they've come to be known, cannot alone, without the leadership of the organization, understand what the perspective of the attacker might be and what the crown jewels of their organizations are. And so the message is that leadership has to take charge. But I want to draw your attention to this chart. And I want to talk to you about a literacy gap which is very imminent or very eminent in today's cybersecurity ecosystem. The business leaders of organizations know a lot about the business, HR, finance, etc. They also know the risks that comes with HR's finance, sales, etc., legal. But they know very little or not enough about cybersecurity. On the other hand, the CISOs, the security experts, know everything that they have to know, hopefully, about cybersecurity, but don't know enough about the business side of their organization. And this ecosystem, or this scenario, this environment is not the necessary environment that will allow the necessary dialogue in order to build a reasonable, business-driven cyber strategy or posture. So what we must do is close the literacy gap by shrinking the literacy gap. And I'm not saying that business leaders will now become cyber experts. Or, on the other hand, I'm not saying that cyber experts must become the business leaders of their organization. But you must shrink the literacy gap. Now, if leaders of organizations need to take charge, and this is my third point, is that at the end of the day, it goes back to the people. And if they can do that, they can do the following. If you shrink the literacy gap, you can get to what I call the symmetry of knowledge. So if the attacker thinks reward, you must think about the impact. If the attacker thinks probability of success, you must think about your crown jewels. And if he chooses his attack vector, you must choose your business-driven cyber strategy or posture. And again, this will allow you to create a reasonable cyber strategy for your organization which is symmetrical against what is the non-symmetry of today's cybersecurity posture of many of the organizations that we see. Now, if you do that, the next thing that you have to do is go back to the people. You must try to close the scarcity of cyber talent. Now, we all deal with it. Any cyber expert in this room will tell you that the biggest, probably the most daunting challenge in cybersecurity today is not dealing with malwares, and it's not about the technology, it's the scarcity of cyber talent. In fact, the current cybersecurity demand is far from being met, and if you look at the US alone, 300,000 jobs were not filled or remained vacant in 2014 alone. In fact, that's about 6% of all vacant jobs in the US in 2014 alone, and this is the biggest cyber challenge, and leadership, when they understand cyber, will understand this as well, and this is probably the first thing that you have to do to get a reasonable cyber posture in your organization. Now, how do you do that? Well, I don't really know. Really, this is a big problem. The only thing that I can tell you from some experience that we have in Israel is that if you look for it where it doesn't exist, well, that's not going to help you. You have to think differently. First of all, you have to create your own. You have to think beyond degrees and certifications. If your job recruitment applications look like 10 years experience in cybersecurity, well, there aren't perhaps many people that have 10 years experience in cybersecurity because today's cybersecurity issues didn't exist 10 years ago. You have to cast a wider net. You have to consider transferable skills within your organization and on-job training in order to create your own cyber experts within your organization. I think one of the reasons that we're sitting here in Tel Aviv in Israel is that based on our unique situation here in Israel, one of the things that we were able to do was cast a very wide net to very young people and train them very fast through the military. Now, I'm not saying that will work for other nations, but you have to find a way to do it. So, to sum up, this is what I want to give you as takeaways. The first thing is that the attacker has transformed. They think ROI. The second thing is that you must shrink the literacy gap, the cross-literacy between leadership that must understand cyber and cyber people that must understand business. And thirdly, you have to mitigate the scarcity of top talent, and that's probably the biggest challenge of all. And before I leave, I want to go back to the Silva commercial and tell you that, you know, it's funny, but it makes a point. When it comes to cybersecurity, we're not on the right course. We really have to change course if we want to do it. The rest up to you, mate. Thank you very much.